welcome anyway. This is a Four Pees Café, which means that you can unmute yourself and speak to me if you dare to do so. This session is also recorded. You should have seen a nice GDPR compliant message about that when you joined. And after this session, it will be posted to our YouTube channel where you can see all the older Four Pees Café's recordings. What are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about pages. And specifically what I tried to do was to look at some of the questions we get about selecting pages in process plan. So we're not going to talk about everything regarding pages because there is way too much content, but I don't expect my content to last for a full hour, and you're more than welcome to ask additional questions once I am done with what I prepared. The goal was to look a little bit at the page selector functionality that is new, at least somewhat new, in version 13 of pdfToolbox. It was already there when you looked at split PDF to some extent, but it can now be used in much more locations. And so I've taken some very simple things, and then I'm progressively going to make them a little bit more challenging. And then at the end, if you have things that that were not answered, feel free to tell me, and we can talk about that. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you can also put questions in the chat window, which I will open and probably ignore during the session. But I will look at it at the end of the session. So let's get started. I just have a presentation because it looks good. I am actually not going to use it. I'm going to switch to pdfToolbox, I believe. So let me see. I don't have too many pixels here, but I will try to make it clear anyway. So what I've done is I prepared 15 different things that you might need to do, want to do in pdfToolbox or using pdfToolbox. I've tried to come up with a way of showing what the result is of the page selector that I use or the other stuff that I use. And where possible, I will try to highlight multiple ways of accomplishing the same thing. I have a document with 20 pages. It obviously talks about penguins. So much was to be expected. The goal of this mostly is so that we can, if I do things with pages, I can show you what the result is. And I'll start for all the first examples. I'll start by using a pre-flight check that is based on, so if I open this, it just has, okay, I'm used to having more pixels, so let me make this smaller. Something like that. So I used a pre-flight check, and I'm detecting text objects. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because that way, in the result window, we can easily see what pages were hit by what I create, and it shows whether it worked or not. And you see the kind of questions I have that I start with. At some point, we will also need to use actions, and I think quick fix is in there as well, and so on. So, like I said, the main subject is page selectors. And if you want to read the documentation about that, then you can do that as well. So I will already tell you that. If you go to the online documentation, don't go for pdfToolbox, go for new in pdfToolbox 13. As you know, the new stuff is always in that manual, and then it gets merged in the next version. So go for new in pdfToolbox 13, and then you'll see something that is called page selector and split scheme. And that is where most of the details about what I'm going to show can be found. So you can read that afterwards. It's not that very complicated, to be honest. Let's start with some easy stuff first. So when I look at this, it is a process plan, and the process plan only has one check. The reason I made a process plan is that makes it easy to find all of this stuff. But it has one check in it, and the check is to detect the text on the first page. That was the goal. And if I do analyze, it will show what happens. So it finds text objects. It only finds them on page 1. And then, of course, the question is, how do you do that? And this is a fairly simple one. You should know that, but it is a condition that, well, we get lots of questions about doing similar things, and apparently it is not very obvious. And I think a lot of the reason it's not very obvious has to do with the name of the condition, which is sequential page number. Sequential page number lets you do a comparison with the number of the page you're interested in, and you have all the operators here. So I could say, I only want to do things on multiples of 4, or when the page is smaller than 5, or when it's not page 1, or so all the standard operators. And then you have a number. The plus minus in this case is kind of weird. You could use it, but I would suggest not to. And if you don't, you can put 0 in there as well if you want. And the other thing that is interesting is that, and you can find that in the description, the first page is number 1. For a developer, that's always the question: is it going to be 1 or 0? The first one, it is 1. So it's for normal people. So very simple pre-flight check. I detect text, and I detect text, but only on pages where the sequential page number is number 1. That's a very, very easy thing to do. Now, this one is a little bit more difficult. Check for text on the last page, and that could already cause some issues. How do you check for text on the last page? Of course, I could do the cheap way out. So if I run this, you can see that it finds text on page 20. I have a 20-page document, so that is correct. Of course, I could use the technique that, that looks at the sequential page number and say, only detect text on page 20, but that's a bit of that's cheating, because what are you going to do if you have a document with a different number of pages? That's not acceptable. So how do I look for things only on the last page? Well, you make a check and you use the condition page is last page. There is a special condition for this. Why is there a special condition for this? Well, because of what I just said. Sequential page number, if I add that for a second, sequential page number, I have to give a page number. And that was not that easy in pdfToolbox up until the moment that JavaScript was introduced, because I could use a JavaScript variable that does the calculation for me. But that's very difficult. Using the condition page is last page is much simpler. Okay. So that still works. Page is last page. Do you have other conditions like that? Yes. If I look for a page, and it's a bit annoying because there are many conditions that have to do with pages, but there is one that I was looking for. Can I find it this way? So I could only look at empty pages here. These are the two that I wanted to highlight as well. Page is an even page, and page is an odd page. So those you could use to accomplish some of these tasks as well that have to do with pages. For last page, you have a special condition. Just remember that. It's very easy. Now, this one makes it a little bit more interesting. And now we are coming to the point where these the special stuff with page selectors and so on, why that was invented and why it is sometimes necessary. So previous to last page, how do we do that? We have a condition for last page, we saw that, but you don't have a condition for the previous to last page. Yeah. Again, I could cheat and say sequential page number is 19, and that would work for this document, but it's cheating, so I don't want to do that. I could also use the technique that I said before. You could use sequential page number and then have a JavaScript variable that calculates what is the second to last page. It's very complex for a very simple problem. So instead, what you can do, and this is new in version 13, you can use sequential page number, but sequential page number matches page selector. Yeah? So if I search for sequential, you'll see that there are two conditions: sequential page number, which has been there for a couple of pdfToolbox versions, and then sequential page number matches page selector. And this is one that is new in 13. And what it accepts here, what it wants, is a page selector. What is a page selector? Well, very much what you would expect. You can do very simple things, like I could say page 1 to page. I'm interested in page 1 and in page 2. So I can use commas to separate individual pages. That's going to work very well. I could also do something else that sounds, I think, natural to all of us. I could say 1-5, and that means page 1 up until and including page 5. And I can, of course, combine the two techniques and add commas in there, and I can have as many commas as I want, and I can have as many dashes as I want, and all of that is possible. So this, I think, we all know from print dialogues and all sorts of other places where you can specify page ranges and so on. It doesn't exactly solve my problem here, because I want to select the not the last page, but the page before that. And how do I do that? Well, Callas made this much more flexible by allowing you, and this is something that developers will certainly recognize, by allowing you to use negative numbers. And so I could say, which page am I interested in? I am interested in page -1. -1 means start at the end of the document and count back. Yeah, so -1 is the last page. If I run it like this, if I do tests, hold on. Have I said yet that I don't have many pixels? Let me make it a bit smaller. So I said -1, and what you can see is that it found the text on the last page. Yeah. So a minus sign in front of the number means start at the end of the document. And so if I want the second to last page, what do I need to do? Well, I need to do -2. If I want the page in front of that, I need to do -3. And if I now run tests, you'll see that it finds everything on page 19. So that is very cool. This page stuff allows, these page selector things allow me to do things that with the other conditions, like sequential page number or last page, or would be difficult, and where I would start to, or need to start to use JavaScript, which I want to avoid if I can avoid it, because it's going to take more time, it's more difficult to maintain. And strangely enough, not everyone speaks JavaScript, so if we can avoid it, then we probably should. So that was previous to last page. Let's make it a little bit more interesting again. How do I, if I have a document that has a cover, imagine that this one has a cover, it actually has, but in many cases you have an outside cover and an inside cover. And so the cover pages in this document would be page 1 and page 2, and then page, well, the 2 last pages of the document, which in this case would be 19 and 20. How do I do something? How do I look for something on the cover pages only? Okay, how do I do that? Well, page selectors are not that difficult in that sense. It looks weird, and you have to well, you have to get over that in a way, because there are too many minus signs here if you look at it. It helps if you imagine these things with, and that's not going to work, but if you imagine these things with spaces in between, it actually helps. And so what is here are two ranges. I have a comma in between. So I have two ranges. The first range starts with page 1 and it goes to page 2. And that gives me, and I'll remove the spaces again, that gives me 1-2, which is a range from page 1 to page 2. And then what I just explained before is that negative pages count from the end of the document. So here I have starting at page -2, which is the second to last page, to page -1, which is the last page. And the middle dash is there because it is a range. So -2 -1 means essentially the second to last page up until the last page. I could actually make it probably a little bit easier here because I can work with commas as well. So page 1, 2, -2, and -1. But it's good if you understand that you can have a minus and what this means, because in other contexts, you do want to work with page ranges, and so then you need a dash. Does that work? Well, let's see. I find text on page 1, I find text on page 2, on page 19, and on page 20. So that seems to do exactly what we wanted to do. Can I do the opposite? And I don't know whether that will come on later, but can I select all the inside pages? And the inside pages in our example would start at page 3 and they would end at the third last page because the rest is covers. And of course, that is exactly what you would expect. You would start at page 3. I have a dash because it's a range. And then I want to run until the third page from the end of the document. This would be all the inside pages. Yeah, you don't have to believe me. I can prove it. Starting at page 3 and ending with page 18, which in this document is the last inside page if we follow our logic. Okay, so you can use page ranges and we can use negative numbers in there to start at the end of the document, and those two things can be combined. How about we have a document and I want to do something on all even pages. And so I have the same system here. What is interesting is that these page selectors have a number of different ways to, well, you can do all kinds of different things as you've seen, but they support 3 pieces of text as well, which sounds weird, but it's accepted. So I can do all, which means all pages, and that will work. I can do odd, which means all odd pages in the document. And I can have just the text even, which will do all even pages. Again, if I go to documentation and you actually look at this page, it will at some point say that. So here, even, odd, did I dream about the all thing? I think I saw that somewhere, so it should be supported. But even and odd are explicitly mentioned here. There are other ways of doing that with page selectors, but if you're only interested in this, that is, of course, great. Remember that there is another way of doing it in this case, because I can also say page is an even page, and that will work just as well. Okay. But once you start using these page selectors and you get in the habit of using sequential page number, then why not just use it for this as well? Just type even, and it will do what you want. And let me see. So page 2, 4, 6, and so on. So I only find stuff on even pages. And now I'm very curious and I want to know whether I dreamt that or it's really true. Let's run this with all. And that gives me all pages. So I didn't dream about that. Apparently it really happened. I really did see that somewhere. Good. So very small example. To only select stuff in even pages. And someone is whispering into my ear, that's by manner of speaking, that here it is mentioned at the top of the page. So you can have all, even, odd, or then a real expression. And expression is the stuff that we've already been using with commas and dashes and so on. So it is there. Thank you, Akash. So let's make it much more interesting. And this comes from a real case. And you can really wonder at some point, do we really need these things? Yeah, did we need this? Or isn't everything possible with these other conditions that you've been talking about as well? Well, it turns out that something like what I have here, page 1, 2, 6, 7, and so on, is not possible or was not possible in version 12 and before. Some things were, because you can do multiples. And so I could do page, I don't know, page 5, 10, 15, and so on. That was possible. Or I could do page 1, 4, but then it would 1, 5, and then it would be 9, because so you can do some things because of the multiple. But there were limitations. And I can do a better thing now. So is there a way to select page 1, 2, 6, 7? You can see the pattern here, right? It's 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 5 is 11, plus 5 is 16, and then 2 plus 5 is 7, and so on. So I have two different patterns going on. I'll give you that part of the solution. This is not a math exam, so you don't have to guess about that one. Again, is this possible? Yeah, of course it's possible. I can just write out all the pages in here, but this is a very cheap and not very satisfying solution, because if I have more than 20 pages, then it's not going to work. So nice try, and it does work. And yes, it selects everything on exactly the pages I'm interested in, but it is not a general purpose solution. So what is the general solution? Well, I have something here that is called generic solution, so we would assume it's that. Okay. This one might require some explanation. There is something else that you can do with these page selectors. We already talked about the comma, we talked about a dash for a range, and then for the negative numbers to start at the end. You can also use asterisks, and you can use them in two different ways. The asterisk can be in front of a number, or it can be behind a number. If it is in front of the number, as here, it means multiples of 5. Yeah, and so I'm going to delete this bit and show you what the rest does. So if I have an asterisk and a 5, and I run test, it gives me page 1, page 6, page 11, and page 16. So multiples of 5. What is the annoying thing now? Well, the annoying thing is that, what if I want to start with page 2, and I want to have page 2, 7, and so on? Yeah, there needs to be a way to specify that. And Kalas has included that as well. I can actually write a start page. And when I don't, this is equivalent to this. Yeah. So if I don't have a start page, the start page is 1, and that's the reason that the first hit is for page 1, the second one is for page 6, 1 plus 5, and then afterwards it's 11, 6 plus 5, and so on. Yeah. But I can modify the start page, and I could say start at page 2. So give me multiples of 5, but start at page number 2. And when you do that, you start with page 2, and then I have page 7, and then I have page 12, and so on. And that works exactly the way you would expect it to. This was not possible in version 12. Trust me, I did a project for which I needed to have multiples of all three multiples, actually, starting with page 1, 2, and 3. And it is simply not possible. There was no good solution. So I had to use some clever JavaScript, and it was a very painful, not good solution. Here it is quite easy. And of course, I can combine these two by having it twice. So now I'm asking for multiples of 5 starting with page 1, because there is no start page. And then as a second bit, I have multiples of 5 starting with page 2. And when I run that, it will give me exactly what I'm looking for. Page 1, page 2, page 6, page 7, page 11, page 12, 16, and 17. Yeah. And if I want to have all pages, but there are shorter ways of writing that, I could also say 5 and then start at page 3 and so on and so on. And then I can build exactly the selection that I want. Yeah. But so an asterisk in front of a number means give me multiples of the number. And that also means that if I want, I have to be careful now, if I want odd pages, I could do this, right? That is page 1, 3, 5, and so on. Why? Multiples of 2, starting with page 1. 1 is odd, so I have all odd pages. If I want all even pages, I can write the same thing, but starting with page 2, and that gives me all of the even pages. This is also what you had in the documentation, that the word even is the same, is interpreted as the same as this expression. Multiples of 2 starting with page 2. Okay. So let's move on to something else. In the previous examples, all I've done is I've shown you how to use these page selectors in the context of a check. Yeah? And the only reason just to be clear that I added the condition is text is to make it very visual in the results, what happened. Of course, one of the interesting bits is to not just use this in pre-flight checks, but what if I want to modify a document? So this example is using page selectors to modify a document, cut out certain pages. And in this case, it says get cover pages. So I want to create something that will give me only the cover pages. And remember, the cover of a document, in my definition, is page 1 and 2, and then the 2 last pages of the document, inside and outside cover. How do I do that? Well, I can use make this a bit bigger there. I can use a action for that. And the action I'm going to use is split or reorder. Yeah. And what does it need? Well, it needs a page selector, and you see that I chose for the poor man's way. I actually like this version better because it's much more confusing. It's much more generic. Yeah. So page 1 and 2, the last 2 pages. That's the page expression that I'm using. And then there are 2 other parameters as well. If I don't use, this is perhaps the most important one. If I don't use this merge again, I will end up with multiple documents. In this case, that's not what I want. I just want this document, but I only want the cover pages. Yeah, I want to modify the existing document. And so if I run test on this, it does page 1 and page 2. Trust me, this was page 2. And then it says page, I know it says page 16, but trust me, it's the last page of the document. I was not responsible for creating this document. and the last page. Yeah. So I started with a 20-page document. And after running this, I have a 4-page document that only has the cover. So these page expressions are not only useful in the context of running a check or something like that, they are also useful if you want to grab a number of pages out of a document because you need them for whatever. In the context, remember, and of course, in the context of a process plan, I could grab these, do something with them, and then maybe reinsert the inside pages in some way. You have a lot of liberty what you can do if you haven't played with these other actions, specifically the file pickup and the create PDF copy and add files. Maybe add files is something we need to do a cafe about as well, because it's very, very powerful in what you can do with it. Yeah, but so in action, the action cuts out page 1, 2, and the 2 last pages. Can I do the opposite? You should know that by now. Okay. How do I get the inside pages of the document? Well, as you could use the expression 3-3 previously in a pre-flight check and only get hits on the inside pages, so can you do that here? And there's nothing special about that, just a different page expression. And if I run it, I end up with what used to be page 3 in the document, and I will go to what used to be page count 18 in the document. Yeah. You can see that I have 16 pages left. Yes, I know this is page 16. It's the same as the one we saw before, but it's twice there in the document. Trust me. I should have made a better document myself with big numbers on it, but it's boring. Another example, and another feature of these page expressions that is very useful in this context. Not so useful for checks, but very useful in this context. And that is, can I actually get a document where I have the inside pages and the cover separately? In other words, can I split a document so that I end up with multiple documents, one that is the cover pages and one that is the inside pages? And the answer is, of course, yes. It's a little bit more confusing, perhaps, in a process plan than it is if you use the CLI in this case. But you can do so. And in order to do so, there is another wildcard that you have to use. I talked about this asterisk, which allows you to do multiples. Well, there is another wildcard that is a $sign. And simply said, the $sign means everything else. Yeah? So, and what I specify here is the inside pages, 3-3. And then I say everything else. And I don't have the merge again. Yeah. So if I run this and test, this is going to look a little bit weird, but we're going to do that. Okay, I have my 20 pages here, but let me go to temporary items. If you have not used that before, if you're using test mode, you can use this pull down menu and go to temporary items. And this shows you the file itself. It shows you, so this is the original file. It shows you a folder with logging information that can be useful, but it also shows you what the results are. And so the results in this case is the original file. This is the 20-page document that you would expect. And then I have one that has _0001. That is the inside pages, because our expression was 3-3, comma, $. So the first part of the expression was the inside pages. That's what we get. And then the second part of the expression was the everything else. And then that is what we get here. And these are the cover pages. So yes, you can use this in order to split a document in the way that you need it to have it split. Different example. Can I use page selectors to invert the page order? Page order inversion is one of these things where I'm reasonably certain I already have a video on YouTube somewhere explaining how to do it in an old version of pdfToolbox. And at some point, the only way it could really be done, and certainly in the desktop version, was by using the imposition engine. Yeah. If you're clever about it, you can write an imposition configuration that will revert the page order. If you're using the CLI, you could do it differently. You could use split PDF or split merge PDF, I think it is called, which first splits it and then immediately merges it again, and then you can use a page selector. In version 13, you can use this action again, because this action allows you to use a page selector. And the page selector that I have here look very good at this. This is not a dash minus, it's only one thing. So let me again split it up with spaces. Yeah, so what I have here is the number -1, the dash, and the number 1. And what that means is start with the last page of the document, negative number, remember, so start from the end. Start with the last page in the document and go to the first page in the document. And split that and then merge it again. And what is the result? Well, the result of that is that you end up with a 20-page document, as before, but now I have the inverse page order. So my cover is actually at the end of the document now. So not only can you do range, but you can actually use this page selector, if you're clever about it, to specify a range in a reverse and inverse as well. So inverting pages is not that difficult anymore. And of course, I now do -1-1, which gives me the whole document reversed. If I wanted only the inside pages reversed and stuff like that, then I can also do that. I just have to change the page selector that I'm using. Now, is that a good idea to do it this way? Well, yes and no. It's a good idea and it's not a good idea. And the reason is that what I'm using is an action, and what I could be using is a quick fix. And so I have the same process plan here. It's really the same thing, but I don't have many pixels here. It's really the same thing. Let me zoom in again. There we go. And so instead of using an action, I have this thing now, which is a quick fix. And there is a quick fix that says invert page order and then takes a page selector. And all I've done here is then use the version all as the page selector. And that has the exact same result. Yeah. So which one should you use? You can use both. However, what I can tell you is that, especially for large documents, the quick fix is going to be significantly faster than the action. In a process plan, the results might not be that spectacular yet, because what happens, even if you're using the CLI, what happens is that you're going to need to run the process plan. And that means pdfToolbox will launch. It will have to launch its whole pre-flight and whatever other engine. It will run the process plan with your action in it or with the quick fix in it. Up to that point, it is the same. And then the quick fix might be a little bit faster. If you run this on command line, there is actually a special command to run quick fixes on command line or in switch, same thing. And what you specify in that case is not a process plan, but you specify a configuration file. And that configuration file, if I'm not terribly mistaken, is a JSON. Yeah? And so you can specify the same command that I use here with a JSON file on command line. And that is going to be much faster because in that case, pdfToolbox does not have to load all the pre-flight technology and so on in order to run your quick fix. So if you can choose, and in this case you can, there is an advantage of typically of using the quick fix over an action. Now, before you ask if your document is 4 pages, forget about it. It's not going to make a difference. But if at some point you find yourself having a variable data document, for example, and it has 1,000 pages or 10 or 100,000 or 1,000,000, then have a look at the difference between an action and the equivalent quick fix. There is a reason they're called quick fix. So how can I invert only the first 2 pages in a document? I've added this for completeness. I don't think that this is going to surprise anyone. Yeah? I'm using the same quick fix. I could also use the action instead of the page selector. All that I had before, I am now going to have the page selector 1-2, and that is the first 2 pages of the document, and those will be inverted, and the others will not be inverted. So what does this do? Don't think that you'll end up with a 2-page document. No, you end up with a 20-page document. That was the input. What you asked was to swap the first 2 pages. So this used to be page 2, and here is your cover. This used to be page 1. And then I have page 3, 4, 5, and so on and so on. So it did exactly what we asked. It looked at only pages 1 and 2, and it inverted the page order in those. Now, in changing the order of pages and doing splits is useful. There is something else you can do. In this example, I have an insert blank pages. Okay? And what am I using for this? A quick fix again. And the quick fix in this case is insert empty page. So what I have done is I've looked at this thing here, and if you scroll the list of quick fixes, there is something that is called, so invert page order, we've already seen. Insert empty page, and that's the one that I used. So this is just an insert empty page step that I created. And what am I asking for? I'm asking for an empty page. I'm only interested in pages 1 to 3, and I want it after each page. You have some other options. I can also say before each page, or I could have it calculated based on a variable. So when I test this, I get a 23-page document. Why? Well, I have the cover, and then I have an empty page 2 and an empty page 3 and an empty page, and then the rest of the document has not been modified. Yeah? So insert empty page does exactly what you would expect, and the page selector allows you to say where pages should be inserted. And then, of course, do I have an example of that? Probably not. No. So, of course, I can then determine what it is. And what I was saying was this. So let's say that I say every 5 pages. Remember, the asterisk is a multiple. Yeah. So what do I get then? Well, it starts with page 1. So page 1, an empty page. And then I will have 5 pages that have not been modified, and I have an empty page again. 5 pages, an empty page again. Yeah, so multiples of 5. What I realized that I don't have an example of, and I am going to show you, is the opposite way. So what happens if I say, well, let's do it with 5, why not? I told you that the asterisk can also come after the number. When it comes after the number, it means something else. It is not going to be very useful here, perhaps. Yeah. I wonder, do I have a way of showing this that is better? Probably. Let's do something else here. So let's go back to where was my split? So that would be one of these. I'm going to show it to you here, and I'm going to say 5 asterisk and not merge again. Let's see what happens. Perhaps nothing happens because I was wrong. Let's see. And I split it up. Like I said before, you can go to show temporary items, and that is going to show you the results. Now you see what happens. I have 5 pages, another 5 pages, another 5 pages, and another 5 pages. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that this 5 followed by an asterisk means groups of 5 pages. So it is no longer multiples of 5, which means every 5th page, but in this case, it is groups of 5 pages. Yeah. And again, I can work with a start number, and implied is start page 1. So this is exactly the same. And what I get in this case is I get the document of 20 pages split up in groups of 5 pages. And so 4 documents, 5 pages each. That can also be very useful in some cases. Let's say that you have variable data and you know that every invoice is 2 pages. Well, you can use split PDF and you can say 2 asterisk, and that is going to give you a whole lot of PDF files, each PDF file having 2 pages. You can use that to dynamically split the document up. Okay. Of course, if you don't know how long each invoice is going to be, then you can't use this approach, because this is always going to cut it in the same number of page increments. There is something else that you can use. You can actually split that mark in pdfToolbox, and the mark can be a pre-flight check. So you could look for the word invoice, or you could look for a text element with a particular size and color and use that to split the document. And that approach would work even if the number of pages per invoice is variable, because it will examine every page and do something. It's also a much slower technique because it has to examine every page to find the stuff that you were looking for. Yeah, so I inserted blank pages after the first 3 pages here, but remember that what we added to our vocabulary, and I think this is the last bit that I needed to cover for page selectors, is that the asterisk can be either in front to mean multiples, or behind, which means chunks of so many pages, chunks of 5 pages, for example. I have one last example. Like I said in the beginning, there are many, many more things that you can do here, but I limited myself to a couple of examples. One last example to remove pages. Again, if you look at the quick fix collection, this used to be very limited, but in pdfToolbox 12, and specifically actually in pdfToolbox 13, there were quite a few of these added. If you look in the steps, you will find something that is called remove pages, and remove pages also has a page selector. Yeah. And this, if you remember what that meant, is actually Do I say that correctly? Yes, and even pages. Yeah, so I could make my life easier and replace it with the word even. Multiples of 2 starting with page 2. And remove pages, of course, does exactly what you would expect. I have a test here, and I no longer have a 20-page document. I now have a 10-page document because every second page has been removed. Okay. So that was a little bit longer than I expected it to be, which should come as no surprise to anyone. My goal today, like I said, there is a lot of stuff that got added also even already to pdfToolbox 13. A lot of stuff that got added with regards to the working with pages. And I could have selected some other capabilities that were added as well. But I thought that the subject of page selectors is sufficiently cryptic for many people that it makes sense to explain it by itself. And so we've looked at these page selectors. Everything that I talked about today can be combined together in a page selector. And on that documentation page, you will find lots of examples to accomplish certain things as well. Yeah. So we talked about the fact that you can use dashes for ranges and commas to connect different ranges. We talked about using negative numbers to start at the end of the document. We talked about the asterisk in front to mean multiples of, after the number to mean chunks of that many pages. And we talked about the $sign as a wildcard that means all other pages that you haven't dealt with yet. Yeah. And if you combine all of those things together with the fact that you can now use page selectors almost everywhere in pdfToolbox where you can specify pages, it means that you can do things like inverting page order and adding pages and removing pages and splitting documents in very, very flexible ways. If you still come up with something that is not supported by page selectors, let us know. I'm sure there are still things, but let us know. But from what I've seen so far in the projects that we get involved with as well, is that this is very flexible, and it's a huge improvement over some of the shenanigans we had to get up to in pdfToolbox 12, where you have to use very creative JavaScript and other stuff. Any questions? I can't see any, so either I've explained it well or I've not explained it even well enough to ask questions about it. The two are possible. If you run into questions, read the documentation. If you still run into questions on the documentation side, send us a note so we can improve the documentation. Normally, you should be able to, I don't know whether that is switched on for all documentation pages, but I think so. Yeah, so you can contact support, but I thought there was also a way to add comments to that, but I don't know whether it's switched on for all the pages on there. Yeah. So if there is something in there that is not clear, send us a note. But there are lots of examples here of all the things that I've talked about. So yeah, strange things as well that I haven't even talked about. What if I want the same page multiple times, which is also something that happens. Well, yeah, you can just have something like this, and this is actually wrong. And Akash, I know you are still following. I think some of these things have been converted to an underscore while they should be commas. I've seen that in other places in the on this page as well. Like here, this should be 1-2 comma something else, and then comma. So if you see a dash here, then it should be a comma, but it would be good if someone, meaning Akash, probably could have a look and see if that can be corrected. But you can get all of the examples here. So everything that I've explained, for example, here is a negative starting page, something I have not mentioned, but because it's obvious. I can start on page 1, I can start on page 2, I can also start on page -1, which is the last page of the document. Yeah? So there are certainly still some things that I have not talked about, but in general, it's very logical. Once you know what the overall structure is, just try something that you think would be logical, and my experience is that it should work. Okay, thank you very much for joining and for staying until the end. For once, a topic that doesn't involve JavaScript from me. That is very surprising. At least these page expressions go in the same direction as JavaScript, so it was still fun to do. Yeah. But no JavaScript. This actually replaces page selectors, replaces some of the things that you needed JavaScript for in the past, and that is a good thing. Yeah. So thank you for joining. I think the next cafe is 2 weeks from now, and if I am not entirely mistaken, that is me again. And then we are supposed to talk about something that hasn't happened yet, which is the release of Gantt workgroup profiles for version 2022. So Gantt workgroup 2022. Hopefully it does happen in the meantime. But even if it doesn't mean that I can't talk about it. So that is in 2 weeks from now. I will take the opportunity to shamelessly also advertise another webinar, which I believe is next week, Wednesday. And that is a Gantt workgroup webinar. So if you want to see what that one is about, go to gwg.org, and then you'll see it there. We're going to talk about, there's been some stuff in the news, virtual news mostly, about Pantone libraries in Adobe applications. And we're taking the opportunity to talk about spot colors and the theory behind spot colors, and what the advantage of spot color libraries is, and what options you have to work with those going forward. So not a 4Ps webinar, not a 4Ps Café, but a Gantt workgroup webinar that I will be doing together with Andrew, and under a Gantt workgroup flag. So feel free to subscribe to that as well, but you'll need to go to the Gantt workgroup website, again, gwg.org, in order to register for that one. And if you don't, then maybe I'll see you 2 weeks from now, again on Thursday, for this webinar about the 2022 specification from the Gantt workgroup and what the practical consequences for you might be. So that should be interesting as well. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you again in a